Record-setting power, check. Gold Glove caliber defense, check. Spectacular hair, check. You're watching Battery Power, Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley. And as we continue our Braves Stock Watch series with Dansby Swanson, who, Grant, finally had that healthy and productive season in 2021 that he'd been building towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what the Braves needed, was Dansby Swanson to be playing out there every day. That's a stat that jumps off of the page as well, because think about how many times in those first few full seasons that Dansby was missing in action and had an injury that kept him out for a month or more, typically at a really inopportune time right after he got to swinging the bat well. So that was not a thing that he had to deal with as much in 2021, but there were some ups and downs in his game, much like there was for Ozzie Albies as well. Swanson fell just 3 home runs shy of joining Freddie Freeman, Austin Riley, and Ozzie Albies amongst Braves infielders to hit 30 home runs. Could have become the first infield ever to do that. I'm sure you've heard that stat a time or three as we talked about the Braves coming down the stretch in September, but don't let that take away from what Dansby was able to do when it came to establishing career highs across the board, at least in the traditional stats. 27 home runs, 88 runs knocked in, 33 doubles for him, 78 runs. Again, he's played in 160 games, which, again, the durability is important. And he had a wins above replacement Fangraphs-wise over 3, which is a quality number. So a lot of things to like about what Dansby did last year, but there were some things that kind of made you wonder if he's ever going to be able to take a true next step. But it's hard to argue with what the Braves got defensively from Swanson all year long. Cory, I'm just curious to see if there is that next step offensively in there where he's able to put together some on-base skills to go with the emerging power, which the Braves loved seeing in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, that's, we'll get into that. That's certainly the big question for him. I mean, the stat line, you mentioned the 27 home runs. He slashed 248, 311, 449. Those home runs, of course, broke a Braves franchise record set by Dennis Menke 54 years ago for home runs by a shortstop. And, of course, you mentioned if he had a 3.2 Fangraph for that number, you said over 3. Maybe most importantly, though, I think you mentioned the fact that he was out there. And after averaging 136 games in his first 3 162-game seasons, he played all 60 during the pandemic shortened year. To play 160 this past year, I think that to me was the biggest thing for him, because we saw him produce career numbers during the shortened season. So could he finally avoid catastrophe in terms of the injury in 2021? And he did. The power was honestly spectacular. The overall production great, proved to be reliable on an everyday basis. He'd been hampered by wrist, heel injuries in the past. This, again, getting past those numbers in 2020, which I think you looked at them and said, okay, is this small sample size theater with this guy finally being able to have the offensive production that you'd hoped he'd had? But again, still some missing elements in the game. It felt like an important year for him, though, when you think about the free agent shortstops that were entering this past winter. Certainly conversations to be had as he's headed himself towards free agency after the 2022 season. But, I think by and large, you can look at it as a guy who, still is waiting to get and hit up at above league average during a season. But I think for the most part, you look at 2021 and say that he delivered where the Braves needed him to.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly was one link in the chain that the Braves could count on all year long. And if he wasn't hitting, I think defensively he's bringing enough on an everyday basis where you can be happy with him playing shortstop for you 162 games if that's what it is. But I think the other thing that we noticed this year is batting order position for him. I think that he slots into that, not in the middle of the order or the top of the order, but somewhere down in that 6-7 range, 8 range perhaps, where he can be just another weapon, somebody that can hurt you, because the lineup, as the Braves like to say, they've lengthened it by adding a lot of quality bats. That's what they did in 2021. Of course, they want to do that year over year, and we'll be trying to do it again in 2022 with Swanson being expected to be a good part of that. But, the 240, the sub 250 batting average, not exactly what you want to see. Beyond that, sub 800 OPS. It's not bad amongst middle infielders and shortstops in particular. If you look across the game, it's not the superstar level of offensive output that you see from guys like Corey Seager or Trevor Story or some of the folks that are out there getting or looking for big deals this offseason. But Dansby doesn't have to compete with him in free agency either. He's going into his age 28 season. I'm just wondering what that next level is for him. By no means is he going to start some kind of decline now based on his age. He shouldn't be. This should be in the midst of his peak years, and maybe there is another adjustment that will help him take it to the next level. The weighted runs created right around league average, weighted runs created plus at 98. Not a bad number, just not one of those numbers you'd expect necessarily with 27 home runs. I think you just spoke to a number of the other things in his game that weren't quite there at the level you want. Maybe a few more walks, maybe a few less strikeouts. But baseball in 2021 has a lot of people asking for that for a whole lot of different players. But it's hard to knock Dansby all around and find too many nits to pick with him, because I do feel like this is a guy that just by being out there gives the Braves the best chance to win each and every night. And one thing I love about this guy, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, is his ability to be in the right spot at the right time for this team.
Yeah, I don't want to get in too much to a guy, having to carry the weight of being the number one pick, but I think it also there's expectations that come with that. When you think about carrying that throughout your career. But it's interesting you mentioned the batting order position, because I go back to conversations years ago with John Hart and John Coppola talking about we believe that this guy is the kind of player that you pencil in at that number 2 spot and you just leave him there. Well, that's not who he is. I mean, that's not what he doesn't. I think the reality of him doesn't slot into that area, and I think him being much further down in the order makes a lot of sense. You look at this last season; he swung at the fewest pitches outside the zone since 2017. He had a career high hard hit rate, so there was a lot to like. But we've talked about this a couple times already. You're still waiting for him to get to that threshold when you're looking at him being an above average league hitter, and I think you have to wonder, is that going to happen? I mean, he had a mere 56 weighted run created plus in the postseason, hit 224 with a 610 OPS. But of course, he homers twice against the Astros in the World Series. I know we could talk about the clutch, but he had an 804 OPS in that series. The moments are always going to kind of carry the overall perception of Dansby Swanson. But I just don't know if when you think about the way that we've changed what the perception of shortstop is, I don't think we're going to be talking about him in that conversation with guys like Trevor Story and Carlos Correa. But, no. Steamer forecasts another 20 home run season out of him. Still, again, they don't even see him at that 100 weighted run created plus threshold. What do you want to see from Dansby Swanson at 22?
I mean, just being able to add to his on base skills. I mean, this is a guy who works a lot of at bats, I feel like, a lot of plate appearances, but he can get strikeout prone. He can go into these kind of prolonged slumps that can last 30, 40 plate appearances or 10 or 15 games. And it just as quickly he can, slap back a 6 or 7 game hitting streak and hit 4 or 5 home runs and add a couple of walk-offs or something. He can run the bases extremely well. And of course, we talked about what he did with the glove. So there's not parts of Dansby's game that aren't there. It's just being able to see some of them on a more consistent basis. But what he does for this team with the glove, and then also in big moments. That's the other thing that I really have keyed in on. Everybody can look back and think about the home runs in the World Series, but he's got walk-off hits. He's got a lot of clutch hits for this club, helping tie games, helping win games, and there has to be something to that there. So I went back into Baseball Reference to just kind of check and see, when you break down the splits career-wise of Dansby Swanson, not just a year or two or the last couple of years that he's playing every day, but career-wise, for this kid who has had a lot of pressure on him, starting with his very first season when they're slapping his face on every billboard as they move into a new ballpark. I mean, maybe that wasn't the exact thing to do, but it wasn't in Dansby's control, but I'm sure he felt that pressure. But when it came to the pressure situations, this is a guy who delivered. 296, 12 homers, 51 runs knocked in his 423 plate appearances in late and close situations, according to Baseball Reference, which also has another stat I like, which is the high leverage situations. Dansby Swanson hitting just south of 300 career-wise, 30 doubles, 12 homers, over 100 runs knocked in 506 plate appearances in high leverage situations. The moment is not too big for him. I think sometimes it's just figuring out the way to find that consistency. All players are looking for it. I think it's in there. I don't know if there's a big next level for him to ascend to, but if he's a guy that can hit 270 with 25 home runs and a 340 to 350 on base, with the other things that he does, he's a great all-around baseball player, and he's one of the big contributors that helped the Braves win the World Series. Heck, he even got to handle that last chance. That's something that's going to be playing in the Braves, Hall of Fame and the Braves Stadium and the Braves highlight reels for the rest of his life. You were involved in a championship club, and you were one of the final people to touch the final out of that, and those kind of things live forever. And I don't think anybody's surprised that maybe Dansby Swanson's in one of those moments, seeing as how much hype there was behind him and how much we talked about him as he made his very quick path through the minor leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you mentioned the clutch stats. Sometimes I think that stuff's hard to quantify, and certainly there are numbers that show it. And you mentioned it there. And he's a guy who lives for that moment. When you talk
Yeah.
to him about, he works a lot on trying to just maintain that normal heartbeat and that normal pulse when he's in those situations. He's a guy who's really, really big on visualization. And, I would imagine him to have a library of, I say self-help books, but he's certainly a guy that, you can understand the mental side of baseball very quickly. It is very meaningful to him. But think about it, he's projected via MLB trade rumors at 10.1 million per arbitration. I think there's a chance that when the lockout ends, we could hear the Braves reaching an extension, maybe buying out some of those free agent years. But I think it all ties to what, whether or not we've seen the ceiling of him, and how do you kind of quantify some of these aspects of his game that don't necessarily play it out when you look at the overall numbers for a season. So can he get better? And ultimately, where do you think that the contract things go with him as he enters, what's really a big year for him personally?
I think some of it is just being able to go out there and show it, and timing is everything, right? If you have a great year heading into free agency, that can change the outlook of just about anything for any player if they are of the right age, which I think Dansby certainly is. To me, that $10-12 million area feels like about what Dansby Swanson's value is year over year right now, unless I see a big step beyond what he did in 2021. And it really just comes to putting it all together a little bit more than he did from an on-base skills perspective. But there's nothing I think that's too big for him, and nothing beyond his ability to be able to be the player that we've seen at times. It's just all about consistency. And he is a heady player, a smart player. He prepares a lot. And I think that winning the mental game is a big part, and everybody attacks it a little bit differently. And I think that he has really started to, in the last couple of years, with regular playing time and not having to shut it down for a month, been able to unlock a few more things. But again, age 28 season, certainly not old. I'm fascinated to see what he's able to do beyond what we've seen in 2020, and then over the course of 160 games for him in 2021.
And certainly when you look at Swanson, I mean, Braden Shoemake's coming as well, the 8th ranked player in the Braves system per MLB pipeline. But if anyone has come to represent Atlanta in the Braves during this time period, it's the Marietta product who, was acquired during the early stage of this lockout, rose with the team and went with them to world champion. But certainly 2022 feels like a very big year for Dansby Swanson.
It really does. I mean, he was kind of the poster child of the Braves rebuild, and it's great to see him be part of that World Series team. And I think the story could go on for a while longer for Swanson. If you're looking at internally, Braden Shoemake's a nice player, but there doesn't seem to be an heir apparent knocking on the door that's here to unseat Dansby Swanson as he sits a year away from free agency. He is an extension candidate, and 2022 is going to be a big year for him to have his value at the highest possible level as he looks to level up, not only on the field, but when it comes to that old contract too. That's never a bad thing.
We are far from finished for our Brave Stock Watch series here on Battery Power. And of course, you can go to the Talking Chop YouTube channel, check out the entire archive of all the players that we've already run through so far. And while you're there, make sure you turn on notifications, subscribe, and that way you'll get an alert every time that we drop a new episode of Battery Power. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.